marketplace already filled up with so much garbage you'd be lucky. It's kind of like a big sale. You're lucky to find the scarf you want because it's just filled with crappy scarves, and there's one you might want. And so all I can do is to make philosophy and its kind of inquiry, insofar as it's critical, insofar as it catches a society at a moment of danger, insofar as it asks us who we are and who our fellow citizens are. I want to make that look important, like an attractive scarf in the pile. I'd like to be able to give it more punch than that, but then I'm speaking in the here and now, in quite a dark moment of the history of this country, in my opinion. One I would discuss at length, but I will in the question period and outside in the hall and in public forums to the extent that it's still allowed to do so. The first lecture, I wanted to just introduce you to some of the themes I'll pursue throughout the lecture. What does it mean that the grand theme, and one that I certainly won't answer as these lectures progress, is what does it mean to be a human being? I will try to localize the question. Today I've tried to say what it was like, in a way. What was it like? How did the Greeks understand a certain set of human practices? And I've said almost nothing about it except about the practice of Socrates. So as we go through these lectures, I'm going to lay out various what I will call ways of living. And the Socratic way is one of critical inquiry. And this shouldn't be understood in the way we understand inquiry today, as just sitting on your butt and looking through a microscope. No, inquiry in Socrates' sense, critical inquiry, is to go around in a kind of passionate search for what's really important, where that itself is up for grabs. It's not like you know what that is for sure. Socrates doesn't just ask what's truth and beauty and the good. He has one dialogue where he asks what's fine. And the best translation would sort of be the English fine, in the sense of, boy, you're fine, or isn't that fine? And so that doesn't, that doesn't sound like truth or beauty. The dialogue is about what's fine. So, Socrates goes around looking for these things in order to get a fix on what is important about being human, what's special about it, in order also, finally, to disprove the Delphic oracle, who, when asked who was the wisest man in the world, said Socrates, and this was reported to him, and he went, this is nuts, can't be true, I don't know anything. And he finally figured out the riddle of the oracle. He was only the wisest man in Greece because he not only didn't know anything, but he had a meta-belief about that. He knew that he didn't know anything. Very important distinction. And as I make some of the rather dogmatic remarks that I'm going to make through the lecture, I should make my own position as a philosopher clear. I'm not a relativist, and I'm not an absolutist in the sense in which I've discussed them today. I'm a fallibilist. That means something like this. A fallibilist is someone who passionately believes certain things. Passionately believes certain things. Some of them quite bizarre, as you'll find out as we go along. But about those beliefs, I believe that they could be wrong. A peculiarly modern attitude, but one that I find myself forced to, through long and bitter historical experience, not only philosophical, by the way, but historical in a more bloody and mundane sense. It seems only wise policy, both philosophically and politically, to be able to hold a belief passionately, but to have a belief about that belief that it could be wrong. Some of you may think that that's absolutely paradoxical, that if one must believe something passionately, then you've got to just believe it. And I hope that turns out to be wrong, because it doesn't seem to make me feel any more schizophrenic than the rest of you to both know that I hold a series of beliefs quite deeply, and yet to have a belief about them at another order that they could be wrong. I mean, I hope that that will work. Anyway, in any case, that's not a bad characterization of the position of fallibilism. And I'm a fallibilist about fallibilism. Let me go ahead and go a little further, which means that that whole stance could be wrong. So I'm a fallibilist all the way down, see? Because even that way of looking at knowledge could be wrong. and so on. And to be philosophical is not to stop pursuing a question when it becomes inconvenient. It is the opposite in that sense. The kind of inquiry I want to pursue is kind of the opposite of a televised news conference, where everyone knows the limits of questioning and obeys without question like slaves and lackeys beneath the level of humanity or free human beings. Ought to make us ashamed. But philosophy doesn't behave in that way. Not at its best. It has been known to. In fact, like religion, it has frequently served the powers that be. I'm trying to pick out a certain group of philosophers that at their best don't do that. Okay? At their best, they question radically. But I'd like to distinguish that from, say, a news conference, where the spectrum of questions are quite simple and very, very prescribed, and moreover, the answers are already written, and we could supply them without waiting for the parties to answer. If you watch enough of this stuff, I mean, I've become a CNN junkie, so now I can just give the report before they give it. I can just say, well, what happened in the war today? We won. Short summary of the news. Lots of them died, not many of us did. We won. You know, I mean, I heard that for 7 years earlier in my life. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. Well, whenever you see a light at the end of the tunnel, philosophy reminds you that there is at least the dim possibility that the light at the end of the tunnel will turn out to be a cave. A candle at the end of a cave. I mean, that doesn't mean that it's going to come out on the other side of anything worthwhile. Okay, Socrates, know thyself, ask embarrassing questions, and yet try to avoid his fate, which is don't be tried, found guilty, and executed unless you're his age. So I want to leave you with a sort of joke about about philosophy for this first lecture, and that's that it's a very interesting question whether Socrates would have escaped from prison. Many of you know the story, and I didn't want to repeat it and waste my 45 minutes. It's a very interesting question about whether Socrates would have chosen to escape from prison, which was one of his choices, if he had been a 25-year-old inquirer as opposed to a 1 or 2-year-old inquirer. It would have been very interesting. I think the choice would have been quite different. He might then have considered some of his friends' plans to escape. Certainly we know that Aristotle later did. He fled Athens and said, I don't want them to sin twice against philosophy. And so that means that at some point I'll have to leave Duke so that they won't sin twice against irritating West Texans who are just interested in reading philosophy books, although I wouldn't say just. And I do think that the analogy that I'd like to leave your attention on is that this kind of critical inquiry, if it can be carried out at all, can be carried out when societies are troubled. In other words, when the meanings of words become topics for debate and redefinition, and that's not a matter of just debate, because the way we describe our lives and understand them is intimately and inextricably connected to the way we live them. You describe yourself as an insurance salesman. It's okay, I'm not mad at any of you if you do that, but if that's all the description that you've got, that's going to structure a certain kind of life, that set of descriptions and those sets of beliefs. And I want to open up a possibility that there might be a way, even under these conditions, to expand such definitions. Maybe not eternal ones, but localizable and, to be American in the last instance, usable ones.